Usman, we can't hear you.
So our translation is up, so we should be able then to get started, yes. I think, right? Yeah.
Okay, great. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure and honor to welcome you to the first edition of the Nutrition and Food Security Dialogue Series, organized by Academia 2063 and the Conseil National de Développement de la Nutrition, Sénégal. My name is Laïbou Take, and I'm the Director of Communication and Outreach for Academia 2063. We are so excited to welcome you to part one of what will be a 5-part dialogue series, where we will take stock of Africa's progress toward meeting the nutrition and food security targets for the continent. This meeting is being live streamed on our YouTube channel, Academia 2063. We are equally providing simultaneous interpretation in English and French. Should you need this function, please click on the globe icon on your screen. Please, during the discussion, feel free to share your questions in the Q&A, and we will be directing them to the moderator. And now to kick this off, it is my honor to welcome our moderator. He is the Executive Director of the Syngenta Foundation for Sustainable Agriculture, Dr. Simon Winter. Dr. Winter, over to you.
That's very kind of you. Thank you, Lai, and great to be with everybody today. You may be wondering why a person working for a sustainable agriculture organization has been invited to moderate a discussion about nutrition. Well, actually, this is an extremely important topic for our foundation. If we are going to see the nutrition benefits transpire that we're going to be hearing about in today's panel, it's going to be both an opportunity, but also an imperative that farmers who are living in the areas where diets are changing, where health is being boosted through additional nutritional guidance and opportunities are then benefiting as well. So this tie-up of local supply chains from the farm to the fork, as it's often talked about, or the farm to the plate, is absolutely of critical importance to us. We are embarking on a number of partnerships. We have a very interesting one called Nutrition in City Ecosystems in partnership with Swiss Tropical Public Health Institute, Sight and Life Foundation, ETH University, and the Swiss Development Corporation that's now active in Kenya and Rwanda, and that's just one example. We're also working with Harvest Plus and GAIN on other initiatives as well. So anyway, this is not about me. I just wanted to say why this is an important topic. And it's my great pleasure to invite our first speaker to give the introductory welcome remarks, and that is Dr. Usman Badian, who is the Executive Chairperson of Academia 2063. Usman, over to you.
Thank you, Simon. Thank you for joining us. Let me also greet and welcome our partner organizations representatives here, Simply Snowala from the African Union Commission, and Amina Tandoy from the Conseil National pour le Développement de la Nutrition of Senegal. We are honored to have you as partners on this webinar. We'll also welcome and greet our panelists, Cheryl Hendricks from University of Pretoria, Sean Baker from USAID, Florence Haddad from GAIN, and of course, Simon, our moderator. This is an important theme topic, I would say, that we are talking about here today. Nutrition is really, for me, the catch-all indicator. This is nutrition, the catch-all indicator in terms of progress in communities. Whether you're talking about resilience or livelihoods, you're talking about poverty, you're talking about health, all are reflected in the nutritional status of the person. If you want to follow one thing to figure out how people are going and their lives are moving, would be around nutrition. We made good progress here since the mid-90s all the way to about a few years ago. African countries have reduced the rate of malnutrition among children from the mid-90s to recently by 40%, depending on which indicator you used. So there was good progress after 2 decades of rising poverty, hunger, and malnutrition. It appears over the last couple of years that we are sliding back. Some of these indicators are showing up for the first time after 2 decades. This is the time, and the year of the African Year of Nutrition is the time for us to ask ourselves what we need to do to go back to the trends of the earlier decades of this millennium, where we have made a good stride in reducing malnutrition. The challenges are real, but the progress we have had over 20 years since the turn of the millennium show that the battle can be won. Countries have done that. It's real. It's not something grabbing from anywhere. Senegal, Angola, Ethiopia, Togo, Ghana, Rwanda, Cameroon, all have managed to cut malnutrition by close to 50% over a decade. So we can do more, we can do better. They all followed several paths, but they had the same impactful outcome. They offer a rich menu of innovations in terms of institution, policies, and interventions to other African countries for us to increase our efforts and move the dial and really get real progress in the area of nutrition. Yes, we will need more resources to win the fight and to continue progress, but also, yes, we can do better with every dollar we spend, as demonstrated by the 7 countries that I just talked about. So there's a lot to be done, but there's a lot that we can do. So the year of nutrition is the moment for us to remind African governments and civil society organizations that we can do better, that we need actually to do better, and that we can achieve the same progress that these countries I've just mentioned have achieved over a short period of time. So let's really dedicate our effort to that, and all of us work towards better nutrition outcomes. We deserve that, our populations deserve that, and I think we have the opportunity to do that now that we know that it can be done and has been demonstrated to us that it is possible. So thank you again to everybody for joining us here. And handing over back to you, Mr. Chair.
Great, thanks so much, Usman, for those warm words of welcome and for highlighting the importance of the issue in this year in particular. Just a couple of housekeeping things before we move on to our next speaker. First of all, if you have questions for any of the speakers, please put them in the Q&A. This will become more relevant when we get to the panel discussion, but no harm in starting to tee up questions now as you're listening to our speakers. Secondly, I see some people have started introducing themselves in the chat. Please share with us who you are and where you're from, both organization and country. It would be great to see the diversity of people participating in this webinar today. And thirdly, there is a interpretation and translation button. I see some French speakers are with us today, and one of our speakers will be speaking in French. So if you see on the screen, hopefully you can see an interpretation button at the bottom of your screen, and you can click on that and you can translate from French to English and English to French. So with that, it's my great pleasure now to introduce our second speaker today to deliver his opening remarks, and that is Dr. Simply Snowala, who is the head of Agriculture and Food Security at the Department of Agriculture and Rural Development, Blue Economy and Sustainable Environment at the African Union Commission. Simplice, over to you.
Merci beaucoup, monsieur le modérateur, et permettez-moi, avant de commencer, de remercier Academia et pour nous avoir invités à ce dialogue, qui est le tout premier dialogue organisé dans le cadre du thème de l'année 2022 de l'Union africaine. Excellences, mesdames, messieurs, c'est dans un contexte d'insécurité alimentaire et nutritionnelle croissante due à la COVID-19, au conflit et au changement climatique, que la 35e session ordinaire de l'Assemblée des chefs d'État et de gouvernement de l'Union africaine en février 2022 a déclaré l'année 2022 l'année de la nutrition et de la sécurité alimentaire, sous le thème « Renforcer la résilience en matière de nutrition et de sécurité alimentaire sur le continent africain ». 2 points, renforcer les systèmes agroalimentaires, les systèmes de santé et de protection sociale pour accélérer le développement du capital humain, social et économique. C'est une occasion unique pour renforcer l'engagement politique afin d'éradiquer la malnutrition sous toutes ses formes à travers l'accélération de la mise en œuvre des engagements de Malabo et la stratégie régionale africaine de la nutrition 2016-2025. Mesdames, Messieurs, ce thème n'aurait pas pu tomber à un meilleur moment car la sécurité alimentaire et nutritionnelle en Afrique est en recul, 3 ans seulement avant l'échéance 2025 de la déclaration de Malabo. Les estimations les plus récentes montrent qu'environ 346 millions de personnes en Afrique, soit un quart de notre population, sont sous-alimentées et confrontées à une grave insécurité alimentaire contre 286 millions en 2021. De nombreux pays confrontés à des conflits sont également parmi les plus gravement touchés par les changements climatiques et l'insécurité alimentaire. Outre la faim, des millions d'Africains souffrent de carences généralisées en micronutriments, tandis que le surpoids et l'obésité sont déjà des problèmes de santé publique importants dans de nombreux pays sur le continent. Selon le mouvement SON, le taux de malnutrition à travers l'Afrique reste à un niveau très inacceptable, avec environ 14% de nourrissons qui ont un faible poids à la naissance et 30% d'enfants de l'âge de 0 à 5 ans souffrent d'un retard de croissance. Mesdames et messieurs, le 3e rapport de la revue biannuelle du PDDA, adopté par la 35e conférence des chefs d'État et de gouvernement en février dernier, indique que même si un tiers des 51 pays qui ont produit des rapports font des progrès remarquables vers les objectifs de Malabo, un seul pays est sur la bonne voie pour atteindre les objectifs des 7 engagements de Malabo et un seul est en bonne voie pour atteindre les objectifs d'éradiquer la famine d'ici 2025. Bien que l'Afrique possède 60% des terres arables au monde, ainsi que d'importantes façades maritimes et une grande variété des territoires agricoles, pastoraux et halieutiques, la participation du continent à la production agricole mondiale demeure très faible. Le taux de croissance de la production agricole est presque 2 fois inférieur à ceux d'autres pays en développement. Ces résultats modestes sont en grande partie liés à une faible utilisation des intrants agricoles, à la dégradation des terres, au manque de la mécanisation, au changement climatique et à une forte vulnérabilité aux crises telles que l'invasion des criquets pèlerins, la chenille légionnaire de Thorne, la peste des petits ruminants, la peste porcine africaine et la maladie de Newcastle. Dans le souci d'assurer une croissance durable et inclusive, solidement axée autour de l'agriculture, les États membres de l'Union africaine en 2003, lors du sommet de Maputo au Mozambique, ont adopté le programme détaillé de développement de l'agriculture en Afrique qui, pour la première fois, définit le cadre de politique pour l'Afrique de la transformation de l'agriculture pour la création de la richesse, la sécurité alimentaire et la nutrition. S'inscrivant dans la même dynamique, celle de Maputo, la déclaration de Malabo en 2014 réaffirme la décision d'accroître les investissements en agriculture d'au moins 10% des budgets nationaux, d'atteindre une croissance annuelle en agriculture d'au moins 6% et établit des objectifs ambitieux d'ici 2025 que sont éradiquer la faim et la malnutrition, diminuer la pauvreté des matières, tripler le commerce intra-régional, renforcer la résilience d'au moins un tiers des paysans. Mesdames et messieurs, considérant une période de 15 ans, avant et après l'avènement du PDDA, l'IFPRI a reporté en 2018 une augmentation de près de 50% de l'indice de production agricole, passant d'une moyenne de 75,8 à une moyenne de 114,28. Cette augmentation, ce chiffre nous indique à suffisance que l'accélération de la mise en œuvre du PDDA à travers la domestication des engagements de Malabo dans nos plans d'investissement agricole et la mise en œuvre des recommandations des revues biennielles est la seule et reste la seule option pour la transformation durable des systèmes alimentaires africains vers l'atteinte des objectifs de Malabo en 2025 et au-delà. C'est notre souhait que le dialogue, organisé dans le cadre du thème de l'année de l'Union africaine, contribuera à travers ces objectifs à identifier des solutions aux défis de nos systèmes alimentaires, plus particulièrement celles liées au modèle de développement de nos systèmes alimentaires et à leur financement pour atteindre les objectifs de sécurité alimentaire et nutritionnelle sur le continent. Je vous souhaite des débats très productifs et je vous remercie pour votre attention.
Simply, thank you so very much for those remarks. I really appreciate you highlighting the mutual potential challenges, but also potentially the mutual benefits of tackling nutrition and climate change at the same time. This emphasis on diversity of diets, helping to drive diversity on farms, which can then help increase resilience to climate change. I think these are very important thematic areas. You also mentioned the importance of the Malabo targets, and those of you who've read the recent biennial report on the Malabo targets will know that we're well off track in most countries across Africa towards meeting the targets. And so hence re-emphasizing the importance of those and helping to support countries to get back on track is an absolutely critical priority. Let's move on now to our keynote speaker. And we're delighted to have with us Dr. Lawrence Haddad, who's the Executive Director for the Global Alliance for Improved Nutrition. And he's going to be talking to us about Africa's progress towards meeting the food and nutrition targets. Lawrence, over to you. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Simon. I'm going to share my screen with you. Hope you can see this. Yep. Can you see that, everyone? Can you hear me okay?
Yes,
okay.
You're loud and clear,
Great.
Lawrence. Thanks.
Great, Simon. Thank you. So my task today was to talk a bit about Africa's progress towards meeting nutrition and food security targets. And I'm delighted to be able to do so. Thank you, Academia, African Union, and CNDN for inviting me. It's great to be here in Africa's Year of Nutrition and Food Security. So let's get right into it. The first thing I did was to compare the Global Nutrition Report data from 2014. This was the first year this report was published, with the latest report, which was from 2021. And one of our panelists, Sean Baker, is currently the co-chair of the stakeholder group. So I'm very pleased to be able to share these numbers with you as well as with him. The numbers are, glass half empty, glass half full, depending on your point of view. If you look at Africa, I'm comparing Africa with Asia here. If you look at the numbers that represent countries, so if you look at Africa 2014, you'll see that in 2014, only 3 of the 54 African countries were on track to meet their World Health Assembly targets for under 5 stunting. These are targets that the ministers of health sign up to at the World Health Assembly. And in 2014, 3 countries were on track. A big chunk, 35, were making some progress, which is good, just not rapid enough progress to meet the targets. 12 countries in 2014 in Africa were making no progress or negative progress, and 4 countries didn't have enough data to be able to decide whether they were on track or off track. Compare that with, now move across to Asia in 2014, you'll see that in Asia, 10 of the 47 countries were on track, 21 were making progress, 7 no progress, and 9 without data. Now let's stay with Africa, go to the left-hand side of the chart and compare 2014 with 2021, and we can see some progress. Instead of 3 countries on track for stunting reduction, we've got 6 now. We've got 38 countries making some progress. We've got 10 still making no progress, and good to see that we have enough data to be able to assess everyone's progress. So there has been an improvement in that 7-year period, but not as big an improvement as there has been in Asia, where the numbers have jumped. The green numbers have jumped from 10 on track to 21 on track, and the numbers off track have dropped from 7 to 5. So a number of countries, the vast majority of African countries, making progress, some of them making enough progress to meet the targets, but we need to get more of them from the yellow bar into the green bar. That was stunting. These are the same types of numbers for under 5 overweight, because stunting is also one key dimension of undernutrition, but under 5 overweight is also a key dimension of malnutrition. It's a good predictor of adult obesity and overweight, and adult overweight and obesity is a good predictor of conditions like diabetes, hypertension, coronary heart disease, and some forms of cancer. So we have to take under 5 overweight seriously too. In 2014, we had 19 African countries on track. That has gone up to 28 countries, which is great. Still 25 countries off track in Africa to meet their World Health Assembly targets, but a much better picture than for stunting. Still not quite as good a picture as we have for Asia in 2021, where we have 29 countries on track and 15 off track. Now let's go to the biennial review, the Haddad biennial review, and this is a chart from the third Haddad biennial review of 2021, and I think really helpfully they've broken down the indicators, the Haddad indicators, by action track areas from the UN Food System Summit. And these are the number of countries that are on track to meet those targets in each of the action track areas. And the report has compared the 2019 biennial review with the 2021. So the 2019 biennial review is in green, and the yellow is the 2021 biennial review. And, interestingly enough, you can see that the action track area number 1, ensure access to safe and nutritious food for all, is the area where in 2021, most countries are on track. So if you look at the yellow bars, only 7 countries are on track to meet these targets. But of the 7 countries, most of them are on track in action track 1 area. So the big picture to take away here is that countries were doing much better in 2019 than they are in 2021, and that's probably due to the effects of COVID-19, as well as the increasing drumbeat of climate change. But no matter which way you really look at the 2021 biennial review, it's pretty thin reading from an ability to meet targets. I think the only country on target is Rwanda to meet all of the targets. So clearly the targets that African governments have set themselves in the agriculture and food space are not being met. Now, this is a super complicated chart that I'm not going to spend any time in detail on. But as I was going through the data for this seminar to look through, how are African countries doing across food systems, I couldn't find anything. I went to the GNR for nutrition, I went to the biennial review for agriculture, but there's a whole bunch of stuff in between nutrition outcomes and agricultural performance that also needs to be tracked. And this is a very complicated slide. It's a work in progress. We're actually doing this work at GAIN and with the Food System Dashboard team. We'll be doing this work with AGRA for publication at the AGRF in Rwanda in September this year. But this is the kind of thing that I'd like to see a bit more of, where we have all the different African countries are the rows, and then we have a whole range of indicators from supply chain to food environment to nutrition outcomes to environmental outcomes. And we look across all of these outcomes in all of these countries, and we look at where countries are doing well, where they're making progress but not rapid enough, and where there's a significant challenge area. So this chart, as it's written, is an interim product. It's not terribly useful, but I wanted to give you a sense of the kind of work that is ongoing and that we will refine and make much more accessible and, more importantly, actionable for the AGRF in September. So watch this space. Now, I wanted to bring in the National Food System Pathways from the Food Systems Summit. And this is work that David Nabarro and 4SD have done, looking across, I think, over 100 national food system pathways that were reported by the countries at the Food System Summit. And actually, this is the April 2022 update. So we have 37 national pathways from Africa, which is fantastic. What David and his team have done is look at which priorities do these national pathways list. And what's really interesting is this second arrow, the resilient food supply chains. And Africa is the region that has the highest mention of resilient food supply chains of all the regions. I think that's really important because African countries are being hard hit by Russia's invasion of Ukraine right now. And this is just one example of their vulnerability, one dimension of one vulnerability, which is which African countries are most dependent on wheat imports from Ukraine and Russia. And those imports are no longer coming in because they're not being exported. In Ukraine, because production capacity has been obviously hard hit, and in Russia because exports are being curtailed. And you can see that the share of wheat imports for some countries is very, very high. Now, wheat imports are not that important for some African countries, but where they are important and where the share is high from Ukraine and Russia, this is a major problem for their countries, especially countries of North Africa and the Middle East. But it's not just countries that import wheat from Ukraine and Russia that are affected. Ukraine and Russia are important sources of key elements that go into fertilizer production. So here we have the world price of urea, which is, this is from January 2007 to March 2022. You can see this price is spiking. It's the highest it's been, and higher even than during the food, fuel, and finance crisis of 2007 and 8. So this is going to be a major problem and it already is a major problem for many producers and farmers in Africa. And it's the same for potash, which is another key component of fertilizer, a massive price spike, not quite yet as high as it was in 2008, but well on its way to there. So, when we look at what needs to happen to end malnutrition in any country, and African countries are no exception, we know what to do. We know that it involves, we have all the ingredients, we just need a good recipe. And the recipe is the plan. And the elements in the plan are: make sure your nutrition programs that are delivered through the health system have high levels of coverage. Most coverage data we see from sub-Saharan Africa show coverage of nutrition interventions delivered through health systems, things like vitamin A, supplementation, breastfeeding promotion, complementary feeding, treatment of diarrhea, these kinds of interventions. Coverage levels are between 20 and 40% of the population that are eligible to receive them. That needs to go up. We need the food system to become much more sensitive to nutrition and nutritious food. That means different choices in agricultural R&D, different choices in public procurement, different choices in which foods are subsidized. There's a whole series of elements that can be made, decisions that can be made right there to make agriculture and food systems more nutrition friendly. We need the social protection system to become more nutrition friendly. What can we do to make social protection better support the production and consumption of nutritious foods by the most vulnerable groups, which tend to be young children, infants, and women of reproductive age. Behind all of this, we can have the ingredients, we can have the recipe, but we need strong leadership, really strong leadership. That's absolutely essential. Advancing the needle on nutrition is difficult because so many things have to happen at the same time. And that requires lots of an ability to connect things, to communicate really well, to document what's happening and change course correct if needed. It requires lots of leadership skills and strong leadership. I'm not just talking about individuals, but it definitely needs someone at a very high level within the Prime Minister's office. And then it needs a whole series of strong lieutenants and sous chefs, if you like, to make sure that things really happen on the ground. And then with that strong leadership, you get finance. I think finance is attracted to investable propositions that have a chance of actually having an impact. And that's what will attract finance. So we know what to do to reduce malnutrition. But I think we have now this additional element, this additional overlay of this seemingly endless turbulence that is affecting the world. I mean, for those of us old enough to remember the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989, there were even political scientists talking about this is the end of history. We've reached a period where there's going to be this massive peace dividend and everything is going to be predictable and stable and manageable. And of course, in 97, 98, we were hit with the Asian financial crisis. We had Y2K, we had 9/11. We've had the food, finance, and fuel crisis of 2007 and 8. We've had the Middle East uprisings around the Arab Spring. We've had COVID, and now we've got Ukraine. So it seems to be a never-ending list of shocks. And I think it would be a foolish person who would bet against another 20 years of the continuation of these shocks. I think we need to steel ourselves and get ready for a world that is going to be more turbulent in the next 20 years, if only because climate change is increasing and ratcheting up the number of droughts and floods that we see, as well as their severity. So my final point really is the need for diversification, because I think diversification is really the best insurance against shocks that are so critical. People on this call, you and I, we can absorb shocks much more easily than people who are living on $5 a day or $2 a day or $1 a day. They can't really absorb shocks without it costing them greatly, them and their families. So there are 4 types of diversification that need to happen. Diversifying the types of foods grown. And actually, if you look at data from FAO, African food production systems are diversifying. This is some data from some FAO analysts in global food security. It came out last year or a couple of years ago. And wherever there's green in this map, it means that diversity in terms of these 2 indicators of diversity is increasing, and that's good. But there are other types of diversity that we need to worry about for African agriculture, indeed for all agriculture all over the world. The second one is we need to diversify energy sources that are used by agriculture. And if you look at this report, again from FAO, it shows that the top 3 energy sources in 1990 that agriculture drew on were responsible for 78% of energy, but 87% in 2019. So there's a concentration over the last 3 decades in the energy sources that agriculture is using. If you look at the top 2 energy sources, it's even more striking. So agriculture needs to diversify the energy sources it uses. Also, we need to worry about biodiversity loss in food and agriculture. Again, the UN reports that, I think many of us know this, there are 6,000 plant species that have been cultivated for food. Only 9 of them account for 66% of total crop production. And the FAO in its 2019 State of World's Biodiversity for Food and Agriculture report, says many key components are in decline. And then finally, we need to diversify diets. Diets is just one route towards improving nutrition outcomes, but it's a pretty important one. And UNICEF shows us that within countries, over the last 10 years, minimum diet diversity for infants and young children barely rose from 21% to 24%. This is in 50 low-income countries. Remember, this is minimum diet diversity. That is a scandal, and that needs to change. But between countries, so that was within countries, but between countries, interestingly, diets are becoming more Western. And this is data from CIAT. And they are showing that as these diets become more Western, that's ever greater risk of obesity and diseases such as diabetes and hypertension. So we need to overlay this worry about diversification over all our work. We don't want to put all our eggs in one basket, because this is what happens when you do that. So my final message to all of you today is diversify, 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 diversify. Thank you.
Lawrence, thank you so much for that very stimulating presentation. I pick up on a few things that there has been progress, particularly in outcomes related to stunting and underweight 5-year-olds, but there's a lot more progress that's needed. There is progress coming through from the National Food System Pathways, but again, we need to keep attention to that. And then you really pulled out a number of key priority areas to make that advancement. I picked up on the access questions for especially low-income, vulnerable populations, the increasing focus, which is very relevant to us and what we support, the increasing focus on nutritional rich and nutritional dense foods in public agriculture, research and development, and support in the food production space. And then a call for very strong leadership. And then finally, it's very strong emphasis on diversification as a resilience strategy, as well as a progress strategy. I think was a really, really strong call out. So thank you for all of that, Lawrence. I hope you'll stay with us in case there are questions that come up. Let's move now to our panel discussion. And we have 3 excellent panelists with us today, which I'm delighted to introduce or reintroduce, because Usman already mentioned if you were on at the beginning. Madame Aminata Diop Ndoye is the Executive Secretary of the National Council for Nutrition Development in Senegal, a country that has made significant progress in this area. We have Mr. Sean Baker, who is the Chief Nutritionist at the U.S. Agency for International Development, long-standing practitioner in this space, and then Professor Cheryl Hendricks, Department Head and Director of the Institute for Food, Nutrition and Wellbeing at the University of Pretoria, who was very involved in the UN Food Systems Summit and in the nutrition agenda in particular. So I'm going to do 2 rounds of questions with each of our speakers. And then we'll open it up for Q&A from you, the participants. As I mentioned before, please put questions rather than comments or promotional activities in the Q&A, not the chat, because we'll keep an eye on the Q&A and look forward to having some time to then answer your questions when we get to that point in a few minutes' time. So, Madame Ndoye, back to you. The first question I have for you is that really building on your success, Senegal's made fantastic progress in reducing hunger and malnutrition, particularly in the first 2 decades of this century. Prevalence of child stunting decreased from 26% to 16.5% by 2017. Can you briefly share with us how Senegal was able to do this, and especially what institutional and programmatic changes did your government put in place in order to achieve these improvements in nutritional outcomes? Thank you, Madame.
Merci beaucoup, Dr. Simon. Merci. Merci à tous les collègues et partenaires pour avoir voulu répondre à notre invitation. Et comme vous l'avez dit, comment le Sénégal a fait et est en train de faire, je dirais, pour réduire les taux de retard de croissance et arriver aux cibles que le pays s'est fixées à l'horizon 2025. mais aussi pour arriver au rendez-vous de 2025-2030 auquel le Sénégal s'est engagé. Et par rapport à ça, on a, disons, 3 décennies de mise en œuvre, de développement, de promotion de la nutrition. Et durant ces 3 décennies, beaucoup d'actes ont été posés, plusieurs stratégies et approches expérimentées pour arriver à ces résultats, qui peut certes nous rassurer, mais pas nous satisfaire compte tenu de tous les engagements que nous avons et des objectifs que nous nous sommes fixés. Et par rapport à ça, nous avons une évolution sur le plan politique. En 2001, nous avions la lettre de politique de la nutrition. Et l'objectif de cette politique, c'était vraiment d'améliorer l'état nutritionnel des groupes vulnérables, globalement les enfants, les femmes en âge de reproduction et les personnes âgées. Et en 2015, après évaluation, nous nous sommes fixés d'autres objectifs et qui, cette fois-ci, on voit dans le cadre duquel nous voyons la cible s'élargir compte tenu des nouvelles évidences. Et aujourd'hui, l'objectif que nous nous sommes fixés à travers notre nouvelle politique, c'est d'assurer à tous un état nutritionnel satisfaisant, particulièrement les enfants de moins de 5 ans, les femmes en âge de reproduction et les adolescentes. Donc, on a vraiment ouvert compte tenu des évidences que nous avons. Et par rapport à ça, nous nous sommes fixés des objectifs spécifiques et l'opérationnalisation de la politique a été marquée par l'élaboration d'un plan stratégique multisectoriel dont le processus d'élaboration a été inclusif et il y a eu une appropriation au niveau national à travers le gouvernement avec ses différents démembrements, mais aussi avec l'appropriation, en tout cas la participation et vraiment la contribution des partenaires. Et par rapport à ça, nous avons un plan stratégique qui vient opérationnaliser la politique parce que le Sénégal, compte tenu des déterminants de la malnutrition que nous avons, et des objectifs que nous nous sommes fixés à élaborer son cadre conceptuel de l'approche multisectorielle, adapté vraiment aux déterminants que nous avons. Et ce cadre conceptuel est caractérisé par des piliers, dont le pilier 1 qui parle de la production d'aliments haute valeur nutritive, le pilier 2, la transformation, la distribution et la tarification. Le pilier 3, c'est l'éducation, l'hygiène, l'assainissement qui répond à l'accès aux services sociaux de base. Et le pilier 4 qui concerne à la délivrance de services de nutrition et de santé. Maintenant, il y a des principes aussi qui sous-tendent ces piliers-là, c'est tout ce qui est gouvernance locale, conformément à l'approche de décentralisation du Sénégal, le financement pérenne, la multisectorialité, la participation communautaire et tout ce qui est communication pour le changement social et de comportement. Maintenant, on a 12 plans d'action sectoriels nutrition portés par les ministères techniques et chaque ministère, en fonction des résultats, des objectifs que le Sénégal s'est fixés, mais aussi en fonction des problématiques que nous avons pu localiser, s'est fixé des activités, des indicateurs et à élaborer son budget. Et chaque secteur est en train de mettre en œuvre son plan d'action sectoriel nutrition. Maintenant, sur le plan programmatique, aussi, il y a eu beaucoup d'évolutions, autant que sur le plan de la politique. Comme vous le savez certainement, le Sénégal a commencé par de projets vraiment spécifiques et sectoriels de nutrition. Et c'est des projets qui étaient toujours motivés par une situation de choc ou de crise. On a le PPNS qui a été un projet qui a été mis en place, je pense que c'est le premier projet au Sénégal pour la nutrition. Et c'était vraiment un projet qui a été centré sur la recherche, c'était des périodes de recherche et de distribution alimentaire. Ensuite, il y a eu, avec la dévaluation du franc CFA, avec tout ce qui est programme d'ajustement structurel, le Sénégal a eu son premier projet de nutrition communautaire, mais avec 2 objectifs. Le premier objectif, c'était de permettre aux jeunes diplômés d'avoir de l'emploi, mais aussi de permettre aux ménages qui sont au niveau de certaines communes les plus touchées par cette dévaluation du franc CFA, de pouvoir en tout cas avoir des informations sur la nutrition de leurs enfants, mais aussi de bénéficier d'aliments pour l'alimentation des enfants. Et durant ce temps aussi, il y avait une certaine organisation institutionnelle qui accompagnait ça. Et à partir de 2000, nous avons eu le PRN, le programme de renforcement de la nutrition, qui est un programme caractérisé par son approche proactive, mais aussi multisectorielle. Et le programme a deux objectifs. Le premier, c'est la réduction, bien sûr, des indicateurs de nutrition, mais aussi des prévalences des indicateurs de nutrition, mais aussi de permettre au pays de disposer de ressources humaines en mesure de planifier, mettre en œuvre et suivre des projets et programmes de nutrition. Donc, par rapport à ce PRN-là qui date de 2001, c'est grâce, en tout cas, aux interventions, aux approches stratégiques et à l'organisation communautaire qui a permis à ce qu'en 2015, on ait noté cette baisse-là et que, certes, il n'y a pas une évolution à la hausse, mais c'est stagnant et cette situation de stagnation ne nous permet pas, si ça continue comme ça, d'arriver aux objectifs que nous voulons atteindre. Maintenant, en termes d'intervention, qu'est-ce qu'on a fait? Le Sénégal s'aligne à tout ce qui peut permettre d'améliorer la nutrition et à tout ce qui est mouvement sain, en tout cas tous les objectifs et les initiatives qui ont été promues au niveau mondial et sous-régional, le Sénégal s'y est aligné. Et aussi, on essaye de répercuter en tout cas les bonnes pratiques, les interventions à haut impact, d'où le paquet de services qui est délivré au niveau communautaire et qui permet de toucher au moins 60% des enfants âgés de moins de 5 ans au niveau du pays, à travers le paquet de services de suivi promotion de la croissance, le dépistage et la prévention de la malnutrition aiguë, la communication pour le changement de comportement et social. Et il y a aussi des actions sensibles nutrition. Et par rapport à ça, il y a des filets sociaux aussi qui sont développés pour permettre aux ménages vulnérables de pouvoir, comme le disait la collègue tantôt, de pouvoir diversifier l'alimentation complémentaire. Parce qu'au Sénégal, comme elle l'a dit, cet indicateur-là est en train de stagner depuis presque plus de 10 ans. On tourne autour de 10, 11, 12 par rapport à une alimentation adéquate pour les enfants, en tout cas âgés de 6 à 23 mois. Il y a aussi pour la durabilité des interventions, la promotion du dialogue communautaire autour de la nutrition au niveau des territoires. Et il y a aujourd'hui, comment on dit, l'institutionnalisation de la nutrition au niveau collectivité territoriale, parce que le document qui sert de planification aux collectivités locales, ce document-là, aujourd'hui, cet outil de planification a intégré les aspects concernant le développement de la nutrition au niveau territorial. Et il y a tout ce qui est leadership, le renforcement du leadership local par rapport à la nutrition, tout ce qui est stratégie de lutte contre les carences en nutriments. Et comme vous le savez, le Sénégal enregistre des taux de carence en micronutriments très élevés. Malgré tous les efforts consentis, on n'est pas encore arrivé à bout de ces prévalences-là qui dépassent tous les seuils, surtout on prend l'anémie. L'anémie dépasse, quelle que soit la cible, les seuils de 40%. Et en termes de stratégie, le Sénégal, on est parti d'un projet de ministère sectoriel à un projet porté par une agence. Aujourd'hui, le PRN est mis en œuvre par on fait du faire-faire par des ONG nationales, internationales, des consortiums d'ONG qui mettent en œuvre les services de nutrition au niveau des quartiers, des villages et qui accompagnent les collectivités territoriales qui sont devenues des maîtres d'œuvre. Et on essaye de toujours faire pour avoir, en tout cas, la plateforme multisectorielle qui permet aussi bien de prendre en compte les actions spécifiques que les actions sensibles nutrition. Et par rapport à ça, il y a l'intensification de la couverture, qui est un objectif pour nous, c'est-à-dire permettre à tous les enfants de bénéficier des services de nutrition. Et c'est un objectif qui est inscrit dans le plan de Sénégal émergent, qui est en tout cas le document d'orientation politique socio-économique du Sénégal. Donc, c'est un objectif qui a été retenu dans ce plan-là. Et on est passé entre 95 à 2020, disons, 2022, de 25 communes à 435 communes, c'est-à-dire plus de 60% aujourd'hui des communes du Sénégal, plus même sont couvertes par les interventions de nutrition communautaire et une bonne partie parmi elles sont couvertes par les actions sensibles combinées aux interventions de nutrition. Maintenant, qu'est-ce qu'on a comme acquis qu'on peut partager, en tout cas qui nous ont permis, disons, d'arriver à ces taux de retard de croissance, mais aussi de les maintenir force de ne pouvoir les faire baisser de manière drastique, de les maintenir pour que ça ne va pas au-delà de 20, parce que le Sénégal s'est fixé à l'horizon 2025 d'amener le retard de croissance à moins 10% chez les enfants. Donc, aujourd'hui, on a une certaine approche des stratégies qu'on voudrait maintenir ou du moins passer à l'échelle. C'est la responsabilisation des collectivités locales dans le développement de la nutrition parce que des compétences ont été transférées à ces collectivités territoriales-là. Il y a l'institutionnalisation de la nutrition au niveau des secteurs, ça a commencé, mais c'est très timide. L'institutionnalisation de la nutrition, surtout au niveau de l'enseignement supérieur et de la recherche, surtout que tous les instituts, en tout cas de formation, puissent intégrer dans les curricula des modules portant sur la nutrition pour que demain, qu'ils puissent à la sortie être en tout cas des agents en mesure de contribuer au développement de la nutrition, quel que soit le secteur dans lequel ils sont, et de renforcer le dialogue communautaire autour de la nutrition qui implique les communautés, les pères, les mères de famille, les jeunes, mais aussi les collectivités territoriales. Oui.
Madame Ndoye, I'm afraid I'm going to have to interrupt you. We do need to move on to our next speaker, but thank you so much for a very comprehensive response, sharing your strategic approach to targets, ways of managing, and some of the key flagship projects that enabled you to make significant progress in Senegal is very, very interesting. And I hope we could follow up maybe offline with more documentation and so on. That would, okay, thank you so much. I'm gonna move to Sean now. And Sean, USAID is a leading development partner which has invested significantly in helping African countries tackle the challenges we're talking about here of hunger and malnutrition. Can you say a bit more about things you're doing right now that are going to drive improved food security and nutritional outcomes in Africa? Thank you.
Yes, thanks so much, Simon. And I'd like to start off of thanking Academia 2063, the African Union Commission, and the Conseil National de Développement de la Nutrition of Senegal for inviting me, but then also just for demonstrating, I think is building on a point Lawrence made up earlier, the political leadership necessary to transform nutrition in Africa and everywhere else in the world. And to start responding to your question, I will give a bit of background. In a way, USAID, because we work across many sectors, is very much like what Madame Ndoye described of how do you bring these sectors together best? And so within USAID, we have our Bureau of Humanitarian Assistance, we have our Bureau of Global Health, and we have our Bureau of Resilience and Food Security, which really focuses on the agri-food systems. Each of those is incredibly important to deliver nutrition. And in many ways, I see my role as being the Madame Ndoye of USAID of how do we help bring these sectors together. And within bringing those sectors together for the programmatic priorities, in fact, align very much with what Madame Ndoye outlined of a big focus on women's nutrition, understanding how much of the damage is being done in utero, a big focus on children's diets. Lawrence has laid out the really very troubling state of children's diets in that critical period from 6 to 23 months when kids need, in addition to breast milk, some nutrient-dense food, re-elevating, tackling the micronutrient malnutrition burden where we have the tools to really do that, and then a reset of wasting. So we're looking not just in humanitarian settings, but also in development settings, and then also how do we do both prevention and treatment. Also within this better coordination, of course, as USAID, we're mainly a country-facing organization. The bulk of our human resources, financial resources, and decision-making are in our missions, which makes sense because we work hand in hand with our partner governments and other stakeholders to make sure our program is relevant to context and aligned with our partner governments' priorities. And so we've gone through a process last year of refreshing our nutrition priority and strategic support countries so that we can bring these different strands of financing together extremely well, hand in hand with our partner governments and our other stakeholders in country. And I say that because if you look at those 18 nutrition priority and strategic support countries that are now up on our website, 13 of the 18 are in Africa, because that's a recognition of both the progress in the political leadership, but then the remaining challenges, particularly in light of the climate crisis, other crises, COVID, and conflict. And this will allow us to really better bring together our resources at agency across the health system, across the food systems, across humanitarian assistance, to support our partner governments in the African Union's efforts to drive down the rates of malnutrition in Africa. You'll also, I think, very importantly, we refreshed last year the Global Food Security Strategy, which is run principally out of the Bureau of Resilience and Food Security, but cuts across other parts of the US government, and it underpins Feed the Future. And you'll note a re-emphasis, a much more increased emphasis on safe, affordable, nutritious foods and looking at a food systems approach. So we can be much more systemic in our solutions to make sure there is lasting change. Well, and how does that all play out in country? And this is where I'm very privileged to be able to follow Madame Ndoye, because I'll take the case of Senegal, where over the last decade, USAID has invested about $80 million in nutrition-sensitive and nutrition-specific interventions that align incredibly well with what Madame Ndoye has laid out. So a big focus on the food system side of promoting healthier diets with the marketing, production, and consumption of diversified, healthy, and nutritious foods. Also support to the Ministry of Health through our maternal child health and nutrition programs to do those nutrition-specific actions in the health sector, which are so essential, including behavior change, supporting Senegal in its efforts to address wasting, both prevention and treatment. I also would like to point out, I think, a link, because in addition to the country level work, we're also engaged in a number of regional partnerships. One perhaps to call out where Senegal has been a real leader, both for Senegal, but all of the broader economic community of West African states, is large-scale food fortification, where I think ECOWAS, and I may be a bit biased, has really been a model about how you bring together a regional trade agenda or a regional public health agenda. And in fact, the Senegalese Normalization Agency, the Association Sénégalaise de Normalisation, led a regional-wide effort to set standards across all 15 countries of ECOWAS on large-scale food fortification. So those are examples of some of the things we are doing to support efforts across Africa to drive better nutrition. And I would like to come back, perhaps. I actually wanted to also point out one thing, Madame Ndoye, that you said that I think is so critical, is also represents one of our priorities of the capacity to deliver is so essential. And how do we move from just doing refreshers training of frontline workers to integrate, as you said, into these pre-service institutions, the capacities that we know people will need as soon as they get out of their initial training. So I think I'd like to call that out as I think a really model approach for capacity building across the continent. I was going to build perhaps on one more point that Lawrence had pointed out early on in setting the context with your keynote of there has been progress. There have been huge shocks, the shocks of COVID, the current state of affairs in the Horn of Africa and West Africa in terms of food insecurity, all of this exacerbated by Russia's war on Ukraine, which is destabilizing the global food system. And if you look across East Africa, we're seeing, just real additional challenges to ability to afford a healthy diet. And if you look at examples of minimum dietary diversity in Ethiopia, Somalia, and South Sudan, and this is pre-pandemic, you only had 12 to 14% of kids who are getting a minimum dietary diversity. And in East Africa, 85% of people could not afford a healthy diet. This is prior to COVID. So we have some challenges, and I think building that security into the health and food systems to be able to weather these shocks is something we need to embrace and take forward. Back over to you.
John, thank you so much. That was extremely informative and helpful, and really good to know about the shifting priorities for USAID. that's really responding, it sounds like, to both the let's say, needs on the ground in terms of the vulnerable people and the issues they're facing, but also the organizations and governments that you're working with and supporting, and that agility, as you said, to re-strategize and repartner and so on from a systemic perspective, I think, is terrific. So thank you for sharing that. We're going to move on to our third panelist now, Professor Cheryl Hendricks. Cheryl, first question for you is, the recent UN Food Systems Summit underscored the critical role of our food systems in achieving the nutrition and food security development goals. What, in your view, are some of the most concrete ways that African countries can adapt a food systems perspective or framework to ensure that food security and adequate and healthy diets are supported? Over to you, Cheryl. And Cheryl, I'm not hearing you at the moment. Seem to actually have lost Cheryl, if I look at the speakers. Maybe while we're trying to find Cheryl, I don't know if the organizers can perhaps reach out to her and see how to get her back. Madam Mdoye, let me come back to you at this point, and very briefly, if you can answer a follow-up question, and very briefly describe the role of the National Council for Nutrition Development in Senegal in addressing malnutrition. Just if you can just focus on that institutional role, please. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Dr. Simon. En fait, comme je l'avais expliqué tantôt, le Sénégal tire des leçons à chaque phase du développement de la nutrition. Et entre 1994 et 1996, nous avions, et 2000 bien sûr, nous avions la Commission nationale de lutte contre la malnutrition placée au niveau de la présidence. Et avec les leçons tirées de cette période-là, de 1994 à 2000, nous avons compris qu'il nous fallait avoir plus de secteurs dans en tout cas, l'organe qui va coordonner et assurer le suivi de la nutrition au Sénégal. Et c'est ce qui a valu la création de la cellule de lutte contre la malnutrition et de son ancrage au niveau de la primature. Donc, la commission était au niveau de la présidence et la cellule au niveau de la primature. Et la cellule était composée, créée en 2001 par décret présidentiel, était composée de tous les ministères techniques et d'une organisation faîtière de la société civile et aussi d'une organisation faîtière des collectivités territoriales. Et on a travaillé avec la cellule. La cellule avait pour mission la coordination, le suivi, la facilitation, la veille à l'alignement du Sénégal à tout ce qui est engagement pris au niveau régional et mondial, le rôle d'informer le gouvernement sur la situation nutritionnelle et d'aider le gouvernement dans la prise de décision, en tout cas par rapport aux dispositions à prendre par rapport aux informations qui lui sont transmises. Donc, la cellule a joué son rôle. Et la cellule aussi coordonnée avec des comités régionaux présidés par les gouverneurs au niveau local. Et on a déroulé avec la cellule, mais quand on a élaboré la politique en 2015, avec notre cadre pour l'approche multisectorielle de la nutrition au Sénégal, il a fallu apporter des changements à cette organisation-là institutionnelle. Et nous avons déroulé jusqu'en 2020, il y a eu la création du Conseil national de développement de la nutrition. La cellule avait certes des sous-comités chargés de la fortification et d'autres aspects de suivi, mais avec le Conseil national de développement de la nutrition qui a été créé en août 2017, je pense, ou août, je me trompe sur les dates là, 2020, la spécificité, c'est que le Conseil a d'autres organes, en fait. Le Conseil dispose du comité de pilotage et de suivi, ce qu'on n'avait pas avec la cellule. Le Conseil devait aider le Sénégal, qui a fait de la nutrition une priorité, à asseoir la plateforme institutionnelle de coordination et de mise en œuvre de la politique de développement, en tout cas d'aider à ce que le Sénégal puisse disposer d'un financement pérenne et durable pour la nutrition, mais aussi d'accompagner les secteurs dans le développement de leur plan d'action sectoriel et de voir comment accompagner aussi la cohérence entre les éléments contenus dans le plan Sénégal émergent et les politiques de développement de la nutrition. Et vraiment, c'était ce changement-là par rapport à l'institutionnalisation de la nutrition. Donc, quand
Thank you, Madame Ndoye. That's very informative, and I think you've strongly re-emphasized the point that Lawrence made in his keynote remarks about the importance of leadership, and not just leadership from the top, from the presidency overseeing the council, but also that coordinated leadership between various different bodies and so on. So that's very, very inspiring. Thank you. We have Cheryl with us. So thanks for rejoining, Cheryl. And I'm going to just address now a question to you. So you were very involved with the UN Food Systems Summit, which underscored the critical role that food systems play in achieving nutrition and food security goals. And out of the Food Systems Summit, a number of game-changing solutions were identified under Action Track 1. Can you briefly allude to the most important of these from your perspective for Africa, and give us a sense of how you see this being taken forward in principle through institutions that are now responsible for advancing progress coming out of the UN Summit? Cheryl, over to you.
Okay, thank you, and apologies for the interruption. Maybe I should start with one of the elements that didn't make it to the top 10 at the Food Systems Summit, and that is keeping the lights and the power on in African countries so that we can actually make progress. So apologies. So listening to Lawrence's presentation, I just brought me back to my initiation into CADAP in 2006, and that's due to Usman. But thinking about how food security wasn't even really on the agenda in 2006, and how that was integrated, particularly driven by the high food price crisis of 2007-2008, when the CADAP agenda was and frameworks were developed. And then watching the CADAP community after the Rome Nutrition Summit in 2014, integrating nutrition into their investment plans far more strongly. So something that was initially driven by ministries of agriculture now had to deal with the issues of nutrition, and what Madame Ndoye was explaining, how these agriculture ministries then had to start communicating and connecting not only with nutrition as a part of the ministries of health, but also social welfare, dealing with social protection issues. And I think you see the iteration of these elements into the CADAP frameworks as time goes by. And it's really hats off to the African Union and the partners who have driven these integrations of a very quickly changing landscape with different flavors of the day coming in. So it hasn't been a trade-off. So in other words, you didn't throw this part out in order to accept another part of the agenda. It's about an ever-expanding agenda that involves ever-expanding number of ministries within the government. And I think food systems does the same. So one of Lawrence's graphs indicated very clearly from the biennial review report that Action Track 3 and Action Track 4 are not really covered by actions that are currently part of the biennial review reporting. And that's not due to a lack on the part of the African Union, because the biennial review indicators were determined before the Food Systems Summit and have been updated to include a number of new elements in the process. And so this really is the next iteration of the CAADP framework, and the African Union and its countries have already issued a statement on the African position related to the Food System Summit and welcomed these iterations. The thing now is to include these changes in the CAADP framework, which then translates into the biennial review indicators and then translates into the national plans that need to be continually updated. And so there's quite a bit of work that needs to be done, because what we're now asking is for those multi-sectoral coordination structures that have emerged through CAADP to now start including elements around food systems in a much broader way. So elements around trade, for example, more elements around decent work, which include the processing sector and not just in agriculture. The gender component has been there, but there's some clever ideas that came out through the Food Systems Summit that could be integrated into the CAADP framework. So I think there's always a lot of work to be done, and there's a willingness from governments. We saw in the Action Track 1 work that I was involved in, African governments welcoming the ideas, but also being swamped by the number of ideas that came up as the summit. So there has to be a filtering system at the national level, sorry, to identify which are the biggest priorities for each government and how those can then be integrated into the process. So yeah, a number of the main actions that came particularly out of Action Track 1, excuse me, relate to gender. So the Global Food 50/50 report, I beg your pardon, just hold on a minute. Sorry, the gender, which IFPRI is leading, coming out, the reset on wasting that Sean's already mentioned, quite a focus on hunger, which becomes really important, especially linked to climate. And then, oh, sorry, not just technical troubles today. And then if we had more time, I could talk about the True Value of Food initiative and how that really can help. Anemia is another one of the main components on the agenda. So lots to consider, but lots that's not already on the radar of Africa. Sorry, I'll leave it there for now.
Great, thanks, Cheryl. Thanks, thanks for struggling through not only with power cuts, but also with a strong tickle, it seems like. And appreciate your emphasis on not only the, let's say, vertical of dealing with improving nutrition, but then these adjacency issues as one thinks about it from a systemic perspective, bringing in issues like trade in processed foods and strong emphasis on the need for supporting women, both as mothers and as well as producers, and so on. So great contribution. I think at this point, I'm going to shift us, because time is ticking by, to starting to deal with some of the questions that have been coming in. And unfortunately, Lawrence had to drop off. So there was a question angled at him around the role of environmental considerations in designing food production systems. I don't know, Sean, do you want to pick up that? How do we link the environmental agenda to the food production, to the nutrition agenda? Do you have any specific views on that?
I'll try to step in for Lawrence. As you know, that's not an easy task, but you know, I think what we're seeing is crisis compounding crisis. And in some ways, the COVID-19 was a crisis that hit us at the speed of a bullet train. The climate crisis has been coming at us for decades and will unfortunately be without it for decades. So I think it's how do we brace better for crisis, and what are some of the things we need to do? And I'll speak perhaps particularly to the food system, but then I also want to reflect on the health system, because you know, I think, and I will build up on a theme that Lawrence said, is that part of any crisis management is reducing your risk. You reduce risk by diversifying. Diversifying our crop production, our food transformation is good for diets, because the diverse diets are better for us. They also are better for livelihoods because you actually will have a larger set of crops that can be marketed, grown and marketed. And they reduce the overall vulnerability, because if something happens with one of the crops that's being grown, you have other things to fall back on. It may be imperfect, but at least you're not having everything bottoming out. And so I think that increasing investments that really prioritize that diversification of the food system writ large is critical. Also, really, and I think this is where the African Union is ahead of the game, of the huge prioritization of regional trade and making robust domestic food industry, both the national industries and the small and medium enterprises. We also need to look at some tried and true solutions. For example, large-scale food fortification. While it doesn't do everything to help have a diversified diet, it's essential in securing essential micronutrients in those staples and condiments, which everybody consumes in any time of crisis. I also think there's some things we need to do quickly on food safety risks, which are going to become more and more important as the climate crisis grows. They have impacts across the board directly on health. They also have impacts on nutrition, because if nutritious food is not safe, well, we can't be feeding it to people, right? And then very much related to that, and I forget the exact statistics, but food loss and waste, and of course, in the African context, that's mainly food loss. There's a huge amount there that if we can start closing that gap, it's going to have improvements. It's going to have livelihood improvements, nutrition improvements, environmental improvements, and I think we can go there quickly. And then while we're looking at the current crisis, the climate crisis, of being a lot through the food system, the response needs to be through the food system, but it also has to be through the health system, the social protection system. I think, Cheryl, you spoke in some of the social protection, but I will call out one of the key messages of the Lancet 2021 series of that. I looked it up, that the low coverage of nutrition interventions relative to the reach of their related health services suggests that closing this opportunity gap is a first step to accelerate progress. So we actually have a health infrastructure in place that's poised to deliver this. And if we can close that gap, that really helps us respond. It doesn't help us solve the problem, but it helps mitigate the shocks. So those are a few thoughts.
Great, Sean. Yeah, thank you very much. There was a question about neglecting nutrition in parts of West Africa. Clearly, we have a standout example on the positive side from Senegal. But I'm wondering, Madame Ndoye, what efforts has Senegal been doing through ECOWAS and across the region to share your progress and encourage progress at a regional level as well? Is that something that you've been able to lean in on? And to what extent do you have a perspective about why other West African countries are perhaps some other West African countries moving more slowly than Senegal on tackling these challenges? Thanks, Madame Ndoye. Madame, we're not hearing you. Let me perhaps your.
Oui, j'ai des problèmes de.
Okay.
Oui, j'ai des problèmes de micro. Vous pouvez reprendre la question, s'il vous plaît? Excusez-moi.
Yes, merci, Madame. Yes, I was just asking, what is Senegal doing to inspire action by other West African governments, and what are you seeing you could do to help with regional progress as well as national progress in West Africa?
Okay. En fait, comme on a toujours fait, le Sénégal collabore avec beaucoup de pays en fait de la sous-région et même en dehors de la sous-région, beaucoup de pays d'Afrique. On fait beaucoup de visites d'échange, on partage beaucoup d'expériences. Et par exemple, je donne juste un exemple. En début avril, il y a le comité, le secrétariat exécutif du comité national qui porte la nutrition au niveau de la Côte d'Ivoire qui est venu au Sénégal. Ils sont venus au Sénégal pour aller juste au nord et voir comment on opérationnalise l'approche multisectorielle. Ils ont vu qu'au nord, nous avons un projet dans le cadre duquel nous avons l'agriculture, l'assainissement, l'eau, l'élevage, la santé, la protection sociale, la nutrition spécifique, le développement local. Et ils étaient venus voir comment on a pu organiser la mise en œuvre de toutes ces interventions-là, aussi bien spécifiques que sensibles, au niveau des villages et quartiers et au niveau communautaire. Donc ça, c'est un exemple. Et nous, la semaine prochaine, aussi une équipe va aller en Côte d'Ivoire pour voir comment la coordination, la planification se fait au niveau du préfet, c'est-à-dire au niveau local. Et il y a la Gambie qui vient, il y a le Rwanda qui est venu, il y a beaucoup de pays qui viennent pour voir comment on fait. Et nous aussi, on va aller voir les autres pays, comment ils font. Par exemple, nous sommes allés voir comment le Malawi organise les différentes plateformes du mouvement SUN. Et nous, ce qui nous intéressait le plus, c'était la plateforme du secteur privé. Comment intéresser davantage le secteur privé dans le développement de la nutrition? Et comme les collègues l'ont dit, aujourd'hui, avec l'urbanisation, on marche dehors, tout le monde marche dehors. Et ça, c'est porté par le secteur privé. Comment faire pour que le secteur privé participe davantage au développement de la nutrition à travers l'agroalimentaire, mais aussi à travers tout ce qui est restauration de rue. Et aussi tout ce qui est, nous voulons lutter contre les carences en micronutriments, mais pour que ça soit durable, nous voulons que ça passe par la biofortification. On a des exemples de projets de biofortification au Sénégal et on sait que ces projets-là, comme ceux que finance l'USAID à travers Feed the Future, reçoivent des pays des autres régions qui viennent voir. Donc, on échange beaucoup par rapport à la multisectorialité au niveau institutionnel, mais aussi la multisectorialité au niveau opérationnel. Donc, et l'avantage que nous avons au Sénégal, c'est qu'on a tout écrit en fait. On travaille par approche processus et tous les processus sont documentés. Donc, on échange avec beaucoup de pays, surtout les pays SUN. Il y a beaucoup de cadres, en tout cas, au niveau mondial, au niveau sous-régional, pour échanger sur ce que nous sommes en train de faire. Et nous restons aussi disponibles pour continuer les échanges. Maintenant, on n'a plus besoin de se déplacer. On peut faire beaucoup de choses en virtuel. À vous. Merci.
Great, thank you. Merci, Madame. I have just one last question. Unfortunately, we are running out of time. But I'm going to ask Sean and Cheryl perhaps to quickly jump in on this one. And the question, it's actually bundling two questions together. It's about children, and in particular, the overweight indicators. How is that being measured, I think, is essentially the question, so that it's not just capturing a lot of underweight children and then you're having a good outcome, but there's a way of tracking both overweight and underweight in an index type structure. How is that best done from your perspectives? And then Sean, perhaps you can also add on, in particular, what is USAID doing about children's diets very specifically. So maybe Cheryl, if you can just go very quickly on the indicator question, and then Sean, if you have anything on that, but then also just very quick statements, and please no more than 60 seconds each. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you. Yeah, so there is a very detailed indicator for measuring overweight, which is the body mass index, which measures your height and your weight divided by your height in meters squared. So it's a scientific formula based on standard deviations then as to how we would classify individuals and children as well. So you're able to identify which children may be underweight and which may be overweight. One of the critical things that we see in particularly Southern Africa is a convergence and simultaneous children being stunted and also overweight. So while you see the severe undernutrition in the very early ages, by the time children get to school-going age, we see a coexistence of this. The same goes for some of the North African countries. So we really do have to tackle children's feeding practices, the content of the diets, the frequency of feeding, and the practices related to that. But being overweight as a child is a predictor of future health consequences. Thank you.
Great, thanks so much. Sean?
So I won't touch on the measurement issue. I think Cheryl's covered that. I think,
yeah, absolutely.
USAID's mandate is very much focused on undernutrition, but we recognize, of course, the growing problem of overweight and obesity. And I think, to my mind, where this comes together best, and Cheryl, you spoke to this, is children's diets. A healthy diet is a healthy diet. It is addressing undernutrition and these risks of overweight and obesity, starting with optimal breastfeeding, making sure there's dietary diversity of healthy products, etc. So to me, I think if perhaps in the nutrition community we had sort of bifurcated undernutrition and overweight and obesity, I think the food systems actually is the perfect way for us to stop talking about that and start talking about healthy diets. And that, to my mind, is probably the most fundamental solution, and where this really comes together coherently from a policy and a programming and at the individual household level of what you're communicating to caregivers.
Great. Thank you so much, Sean. So I'm just going to quickly summarize a few of my own takeaways from this excellent discussion. And I want to thank Sean and Cheryl and Madame Ndoye and Usman, and also, although he's not with us anymore, Lawrence and Simplice for their excellent remarks in this very informative and good discussion. And Usman, I hope it's met your objectives of us kicking off this series with a good comprehensive overview of what's going on. From my perspective, I think I just want to take away a few things. One is the UN Food Systems Summit, of course, was very much focused on the systems. And I think we heard loud and clear today that taking the systemic view, whether you're talking about research systems where instead of just, nutrition research over here and agriculture research over there, and not, bringing them together, actually thinking about, food, nutrition, agriculture, research as a system of research and so on. This is something I think that is really, really important. But we also need the systems approach on the delivery of solutions, whether that's looking at biofortified foods or food fortification in the processing sector, and how the trading works, so that as you're trying to, of course, improve food fortification nationally, you look at what is happening in terms of regional trade and so on. That, again, is taking a sort of systemic view to trying to then provide the solutions. We heard a lot of focus on the need to support women and children, specifically in this, and some suggestions around mechanisms to do that. We heard repeated calls for the importance of leadership, leadership at a national level, leadership at an institutional level, leadership at an organizational level, and then the coordination across different institutions, public and private, in well-coordinated structures, not leaving that coordination just chance. But the Senegal example of the National Council and its regional councils and so on was extremely informative. And Madame Ndoye, thank you also for your comments about the regional coordination outside of the national boundaries. So that is critically important. And then we heard a lot of importance around the role of financing, that whether it's USAID leaning in heavily to support Senegal in its journey and providing complementary financing, or national governments themselves saying, no, we've got some very clear priorities that we want to make sure are supported financially out of our national budgets, and hopefully then taking the systemic approach to bring together both the national financing flows together with cooperating partner financing flows. And then finally, I want to just come back to Lawrence's point about diversification and the importance in these growing crises and sequence crises that we're experiencing right now of diversification and resilience. So I'm going to now finally hand over back to Madame Ndoye for closing remarks in the last minute that we have left in front of us. Thank you all very much for joining. I'm sorry we didn't get to all the questions. Madame Ndoye, back to you.
Merci beaucoup, Dr. Simon. Je pense que vous avez déjà fait le résumé. Je voudrais juste dire un grand merci. Et vraiment, c'est avec beaucoup de satisfaction que je vais dire ces quelques mots au terme de notre riche panel de ce jour qui a porté sur les progrès de l'Afrique vers la réalisation des objectifs, des réussites, des défis et des opportunités en matière de nutrition et de sécurité alimentaire. Je voudrais remercier l'ensemble des panélistes pour la qualité des interventions, mais également remercier les participants qui ont montré, de par leur présence, tout l'intérêt qu'ils ont porté aux problématiques de nutrition et de sécurité alimentaire. Je ne doute point des différentes parties prenantes de la nutrition et de la sécurité alimentaire qu'ils sauront capitaliser dans leurs axes au niveau de leurs différentes structures, les idées pertinentes qui ont été développées ce jour durant ce panel. Et comme ils l'ont tous dit, je pense que nous avons discuté, nous avons mieux compris, mais aussi nous sommes avertis. Je pense que nous tous aujourd'hui, nous sommes préparés par rapport aux chocs qui sont là. Les chocs, ça fait 3 ans déjà qu'on est en train de vivre des chocs et ça se répercute sur la sécurité alimentaire, sur la nutrition, sur la résilience des populations, d'où le besoin vraiment de renforcer la résilience nutritionnelle et la sécurité alimentaire sur le continent africain, renforcer les systèmes agroalimentaires de santé et de protection sociale pour accélérer le développement humain, social et économique. Ça, c'est le thème que l'Union africaine a retenu. Mais c'est un thème qui colle aussi avec les réalités du jour. Et je pense que nous allons nous tous profiter de cette année de l'Union africaine pour la nutrition pour développer le maximum, échanger le maximum, prendre le maximum d'engagement pour une amélioration de la nutrition et pour un peuple plus résilient face à tous ces chocs-là. Donc, je pense que je ne vais pas être long. Nous avons parlé de l'urbanisation, nous avons parlé des défis de l'alimentation, nous avons parlé des défis de la dégradation progressive des systèmes d'approvisionnement. Je pense que nous avons en tout cas eu beaucoup d'informations et chacun d'entre nous va voir comment les utiliser à bon escient, toujours dans l'amélioration de la nutrition. Je voudrais terminer, Monsieur Dr Simon, en tout cas pour dire à toutes les parties prenantes de faire attention à ces défis et de les remercier, d'honorer de leur présence au prochain panel qu'on aura les mois à venir. Merci beaucoup à vous.
Thank you so much. Merci beaucoup, Madame Doye. Thank you to our moderator, Dr. Simon Winter. Thank you so much for agreeing to moderate this session. I would like to extend our heartfelt gratitude to all our panelists. Thank you for honoring our invitation. Please look at the chat box. We have shared a link to our newsletter. If you liked what you saw today, I have seen that there have been some very interesting rich comments in the chat. Please subscribe to our newsletter so that you can keep abreast with all our initiatives. As Madame Doye pointed out, please watch this space for the 2nd edition of the Nutrition and Food Security Dialogue series. We will be communicating the dates with you. And also, we will be sharing a post-dialogue brief to share the key takeaways from this very rich session. Thank you so much. Thank you for joining us. And next time, bring a friend. See you. Bye.
All right, thank you very much. Thanks, Lawrence. Thanks, Sean. Thanks, Simon, Cheryl. It's been great. And merci à Madame Doye et l'équipe de CDN. It was superb. Thank you very much.
Merci tout le monde. C'était un plaisir.
All right, ciao, ciao.
Yeah, thanks a lot, everybody. That was great.
So much.
And congratulations, team. Tsitsi, well done. Thanks.
Yeah,
Bye.
thank you. Thanks to the organizers.
So much, Simon, for moderating. Bye-bye.
Bye.